Hi, my name is James Chavez, and I recently started Mobilized Men to help Christian men live better, to be better, and to live mobilized in their faith, in their purpose, and in their life. I want to start by reading Psalm 90:12. Many of you know this. So teach us to number our days so that we may have a heart of wisdom. Wisdom is the key to so much of what we talk about. So welcome to Mobilized Men. Last time I shared why it was important to care about being better. We challenged ourselves not to settle for mediocrity, but to pursue growth in our faith, in our character, in our leadership, and in obedience to Christ. That's the most important. But today I want to ask a deeper question. What are we becoming better for? Because at some point, every man has to face the reality that many of us spend our lifetimes trying to avoid. One day, our time on earth will end. Last time I checked, the birth to death ratio was still hovering right at about 1-to-1. So if you were born, you're going to die. Isn't that encouraging? But our time here, it's going to end. We know that. Our careers, it's going to end. Our accomplishments, they're going to fade. Someone else is eventually going to own all our possessions that we worked so hard to accumulate. Ouch! The titles we worked so hard to earn, they're no longer going to matter. And when that day comes, the question won't be, how much money did I make? How many awards did I win? Or how many followers did I accumulate? That's not going to matter. The question will be, what legacy will I leave behind? When Scripture talks about wisdom, it's often pointing us towards eternity. I started by sharing Psalm 90. And remember, it says, teach us to number our days. And that's important. Because in other words, live with the understanding that your time here on earth is limited. So what are you going to do with it? How are you going to invest it? A wise man doesn't just think about today. He thinks about what remains after he's gone. The world tells men to build wealth, build influence, build a name for themselves, right? Accumulate all you can. Jesus tells us to build a life that points people to him. So how do you do that? A life well lived is not measured by what we accumulate. It's measured by what we invest into others. Think about the men in Scripture. Those who had influence, and their influence continues thousands of years later. We still read about it. We're still encouraged by the life of Abraham. He left a legacy of faith. Joseph, he left a legacy of integrity. David left a legacy of worship. Paul left a legacy of discipleship and courage. The list can go on and on. But none of these men were perfect, right? We know that because we read about their faults. But they were faithful, and their faithfulness leaves footprints that last long after they're gone. As husbands, as fathers, grandfathers, leaders, and followers of Christ, our greatest legacy will never be our possessions. It'll be our example. Our children remember a man who loved Jesus. That's what matters. And will our wife remember a man who led with humility and sacrifice? That matters. Will our friends remember a man whose character matched his words? That matters. Will our church remember a servant who faithfully used his gifts for God's glory? Will people see evidence that we lived for something greater than ourselves? That's tough. The truth is that every man is leaving a legacy right now. The question isn't whether or not you're leaving a legacy. The question is, what kind of legacy are you building? So that's what I wanted us to think about today. Legacy isn't created in one big moment, like in the movies. It's built through daily decisions, every prayer, every act of integrity, every difficult conversation, every moment of forgiveness, every investment in your marriage, every lesson you teach your children. Every opportunity to share Christ is another opportunity for legacy. These seemingly small moments become the story of your life, and that story will impact generations to come. As mobilized men, we don't pursue growth simply to become successful. We pursue growth so that we can leave behind a legacy that points others towards Jesus. That's what matters. At the end of your life, people may forget what you owned. In fact, they probably will. They may forget your job title. They probably will. They may forget your accomplishments. I guarantee they will. But they'll remember how you loved. They'll remember how you served. They'll remember how you led. They'll remember whether your life reflected Christ. A life well lived is not about being remembered. It's about making Jesus unforgettable to those who knew you. That's legacy. So today ask yourself, if my life ended today, what legacy would I leave? What would my family say mattered most to me? What would my actions reveal about my priorities? These are tough questions. And what can I begin doing today to ensure that my legacy honors Christ? Because the choices you make today are writing the story that others will remember tomorrow and forever. My father passed away and went to be with Jesus a couple of weeks ago. I miss my dad dearly. But one of the greatest things I can celebrate about my dad is that he left a lasting Christ-centered legacy that impacted countless people over the course of his life. That's incredible. When we stood up and we shared stories about my dad at his life celebration service, we didn't say things like, oh man, he sure loved to fish, or he really loved his cars, or what a great bank account he was able to build up and accumulate. No. We got to share how we used every dollar, every conversation, every opportunity, every breath, every resource, every moment to point people to Jesus. My dad never wavered from that singular focus and purpose. He never did. He lived with the end in mind. Friends, that's how you leave a legacy. So here's your challenge if you choose to accept it, Mobilized Men. Today, take 10 minutes. Write down the answer to this simple question. You ready? What do I want my wife, my children, my grandchildren, my friends, my church to say about me when I'm gone? Then identify one action you can take this week that moves your life closer to that legacy. The good news is that if you're listening to this, you still have time. It's not too late. Make today count. Thank you for joining me today. Share this with somebody in your life, some other people, some friends, some men that would be encouraged by this. And I'll see you next time.